All right, it is the top of the hour, so we are going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. From Documentum to Microsoft 365, strategies to ensure migration success. We appreciate you joining us today, and the first thing I'd like to do is take a second and introduce our speakers. My name is Shana Horka, and I work in product marketing here at Gimmal, and I'm joined by our key speaker today, solutions architect John Couvillon. Now, before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items to go through. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit them on the Q&A section on your screen, and we're going to answer as many as we have time for at the end of the presentation. There will be at least one poll question that you will see pop up, so please keep an eye out for that. All answers are anonymous. And as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know so we can assist you. And to kick things off, I have just a couple of slides here to tell you a little bit about Gimmal and how we can help you take control of your information with our suite of solutions. Gimmal is an information governance software company founded in 2002. Our mission is to help you achieve your information governance goals by providing solutions that balance the value your information provides with the risk it also presents. Whether you're trying to discover information in unstructured data sources, migrate from legacy systems, or comply with policies across multiple repositories, Gimmal can help you achieve your information governance goals. We have a client success team and a global network of partners that deliver solutions in conjunction with key partners like Microsoft and SAP. Gimmal's family of software products work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. Our comprehensive solutions include migration from legacy systems, file analysis and e-discovery, electronic and physical records management, document management for SAP software. And for those who are not new to our webinars, you may have noticed a slight name change. They are the same products, just with a more convenient name. But without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to John so he can get started with today's presentation. Oops, John, it looks like you're on mute.
You are correct. Thank you for that. So let's get started again. Many of you may be joining today because you have already decided to pull the trigger on moving off of your old Documentum solution. Many of you may be kind of sitting on the fence and trying to build a case for it. So hopefully today's presentation can satisfy you, whether you're in either of those camps, and give you some information that can be useful to you in your journey to get off of Documentum. So if you've been using Documentum for a while, none of these points on these next couple of slides are going to be a surprise to you, but they're important to call out because they really are the underlying themes that we hear most about why customers are choosing to finally leave the old Documentum platform that they have and move to M365. And most of those points revolve around cost and complexity. Again, as you know, if you've been using Documentum for a while, the costs can be pretty high, and sometimes it's hard to justify continuing to pay those annual maintenance costs, especially if the tool is not really right for you anymore. Maybe it was at one point in time the right tool and it did provide a lot of value, but in many cases you've kind of moved beyond that and you are paying maintenance costs and you're having to pay expensive professional fees to either companies or individuals still in your organization supporting the platform because of some proprietary nature or customizations that you may have done on your system. Not to mention that what makes it even more difficult is, you've got duplication of systems. You've got your SharePoint Online system that you've already started to leverage, and you still have this old system. And for many companies, they have more than one other system. They'll have a handful. And then on top of that is if you're continuing to pay the maintenance costs and you're continuing to keep that Documentum system around, you're having to keep it upgraded. Because if you don't, you're going to start losing support for not only the Documentum system, potentially for underlying components that are requirements or prerequisites. So it's a hard problem, but hopefully we can get you some assistance to get beyond that. But wait, there's more. So it's not just about cost and complexity. There's so much more about the platform that really is troubling, that should be good ammunition to help get you off of the fence if you're not off the fence. And that's that since it is an older technology and it has been carried forward at a minimal level to keep people compliant with technologies that are supporting the Documentum platform, you're having to deal with not getting new functionality or new features that you want, because it's a minimalistic type of approach to just keep the thing up and running, keep the wheels on. The value of the platform to your users is low because it's not really meeting or fulfilling their requirements anymore. In many cases, they're using some other system, but having to still go back to this system just for certain things. So the value of the overall platform is at a low as compared to where it used to be. Again, I mentioned business requirements. Maybe at one point in time, it was a really powerful tool for your organization, but now it might not be quite so valuable to you. I talked about upgrading, but those upgrades oftentimes are challenging and difficult depending on what is required for you to upgrade, whether you're having to keep the OS upgraded as well as the database versions and the platform versions. It can be complex and costly, as I mentioned before. And then lastly, the tool is likely not supporting your overall corporate governance goals that you've set for your newer platforms, because they're in a system that's aside and that may be implemented differently than your primary systems. It's likely not really participating in those goals. So you're here because you're either thinking about moving to 365, or you've already made that decision and you're kind of maybe right in the middle of the process, but you understand the tremendous ROI that can be gained from migrating. And if you are on the fence, these are clear drivers for you to help build a case to get there. You're simplifying your stack, your technology stack. You're removing the duplication. You're getting rid of having to manage two systems that are both managing documents and processes. You're making it easier on your users. Your users are now going to only have one place to go to get the information they need to do their job. And you're able to leverage the powerful platforms that are part of the M365 solution in Azure and the Power Platform. And then total cost of ownership. You're not having to pay for staff to manage that old system. You're not having to do the upgrades anymore. You're not having to pay that old maintenance, as well as keep that specialized hardware up and running just for that one product. And then you're getting rid of proprietary Documentum knowledge that's needed to support that. And you can take those individuals that may have been spending part of their time dealing with Documentum and refocus them on the future direction with your Microsoft stack and everything that it's going to offer for you. So next slide, we're going to ask a quick poll. And we're interested in kind of, if you're deciding to retire your Documentum system, what's the primary reason that you're considering? And you may have a more than one, but we really are interested in kind of what's the primary reason that you're considering or have decided to retire.
And you should see the poll pop up as a secondary window, and I see the results tabulating now. So we'll give it a couple more seconds, John, and then we'll go ahead and share the results.
Okay, that's good. Great. Okay, so let's move on. So let's start talking about some of the typical challenges that we see that organizations are wrestling with as they're going through this process. We've talked about many of these. Complexity is a big one. You really know, you go into it knowing, especially if you've got a Documentum system that you've done a significant amount of customizations to, and many long-time Documentum organizations have done that, and they know that replacing a lot of that functionality could be daunting and it could be complex. So that's a real big challenge, and there are ways to get around that. Good analysis and upfront planning. When we talk about migrations, we tend to say that it's mostly process and people, and less about the technology. The tools that you use, including our Gimmal migrate tools, can be good at moving the bits and bytes across the wire once you tell it what to do. But there's a tremendous amount of people and process that has to go into that to understand and to plan for what can be a really complex process. The time to migrate. So if you have a tremendous amount of data, there's often a concern that it's going to take you forever, just because of the laws of physics, to move those bits and bytes across the wire. It's going to take some time, and that may be the case, but there are ways to plan and to get around that using the right tools, and we'll talk about a little bit that a little bit more. There's technologies that can help you get over the hump with helping you to make the migration a little bit more efficient and effective. And then cost. The cost to actually pull the trigger and go through the process, it's often not zero, but you can often justify that by looking at how much you're spending on maintenance and renewal fees for these old legacy systems. And what's the cost of doing nothing? What are you paying for if you're not moving this information to your new system? And lastly here, change is hard. Users get used to doing things one way, and they often don't want to switch, and it often takes getting to that point where the pain to remain the same is more than the change, and that's what finally gets people to move to the new platform. But there are ways also to manage that process as well. Your planning, your change management, as with any project, are important especially for migrations, and that can be a way to help overcome that that part of the challenge. So where do you start? And this is kind of going towards methodology and pointing out, some of the things that are obvious, but that are a large part of the way that we deliver migration projects, and they are important, and that's why they're here. Discovery is by far one of the most important pieces. You have to understand what you have. You have to take inventory. You have to do an assessment of what you've got, because it's going to play into your planning and your scheduling. You have to know all of the metrics. You've got to be able to understand what's there. And that's why that part of the process can be challenging, is that oftentimes, if you've been using Documentum for a long time, you may have lost your expertise and your people that really understand what you have under the covers. What do you have in the system? If you've been, fostering this system for a long time, you may have lost track of that. And so it may take a lot of work to do this inventory and to go through with a fine-tooth comb to understand what is there, because that's going to be what feeds into your requirements for your overall migration. And it's going to feed into some of the key decisions that you're going to have to make while you're planning for that, which is the next step in the process. You've got to be able to plan for how you're going to execute on it, and we'll cover this a little bit more in the next couple of slides. And you've got to plan for the unexpected. You've got to be able to know how you're going to handle the odd situation that you're going to come across during your migration. And then the migration, really, once you've gotten through those first few steps, is going to be kind of the easiest part, because if you follow your plan, then things are going to move pretty smoothly. If you don't, then, or if you haven't done the planning, this is where it's going to be challenging, because you're going to start to see things that you didn't plan for, and you're not going to know how to deal with that. And lastly, not really a bullet by itself or as a final step, but as a final point that is important throughout the entire methodology or your migration process, is change management. You have got to change to handle your communication with your users from day one, and develop your plans for communicating early and often throughout the whole process, or else your adoption is going to be low. Your users are not going to know where to find things. They're not going to understand the process. They're not going to have a good knowledge about expectations, about when things are going to happen, and when they can expect to get back into the system if you're turning it off, or where their data is going. So that's really a really key part of the process. So focusing on discover and analyze, this was the first point. And what are you really doing during that phase, and why is it so important? Well, this is where you're really starting to develop an understanding of, things like the total volume of data that you have, and how much storage space is going to be needed to house all of this information. What formats of information do I have? Are all those formats supported in SharePoint Online, for example? The answer to that is no. More than likely, you've got things that you're not going to be able to move, or there are things that you might not want to move to SharePoint Online if you do find it in your Documentum repository. You've got to decide, what are you going to migrate and what are you going to leave behind? Do you have things there that are maybe already expired from a retention perspective? If you're dealing with records and not just project data, or things that are needing to be classified, do you have data that you could archive or just destroy outright? Do you take everything? Do you take all versions? Is there some cutoff? Do you maybe get the last 5 versions, or do you get everything newer than a certain date, and everything older you are not going to migrate into SharePoint? Maybe you're just going to dump that out to the file system, and you're going to keep an archive for a certain period of time, and then you can dispose of that later. What about metadata and your document types and your attributes that you've got in your Documentum system? If you're like most organizations and have been using Documentum for a while, you've probably got a whole bunch of document types and metadata defined in a hierarchical object model that you're going to have to analyze and determine not only what do I have and what am I using, but how am I going to map that over to SharePoint Online? Am I going to keep all of that information, or what do I want to keep? And then understanding the differences between the source and destination systems. things like invalid characters. Characters that were valid in Documentum in an object name or in a piece of metadata may not be, and there are some are not going to be valid in SharePoint Online. Reserved words. Long paths. There's definitely a limit on a full path inside of SharePoint Online that you have to be conscious of. And if you've got some really deep structures in your folder hierarchy in Documentum, you're going to have a way to identify where those are and how you're going to deal with those, and whether you're going to need your users to go rectify some of those situations, or whether you're going to need to handle it on the fly as part of your migration process. What about storing multiple formats for a document? Whereas Documentum will allow you to have some different renditions of content, and some of the structures that exist in Documentum that don't exist verbatim in SharePoint Online, you're going to have to deal with that. What about workflow processes and integrations? Clearly, the two systems are different. Have a workflow builder like you do in Documentum that you can just copy it over. You're going to have to re-implement. And what tools are you going to use to do that? Are you going to use out-of-the-box SharePoint, or are you going to need to use something like an Nintex to develop more complex workflow processes? And do you have integrations, third-party integrations with your Documentum system? Are you integrating Documentum with some other line of business applications that you're going to need to understand how to port over? So those are all important things that are going to play into your requirements for your migration. And once you've got an understanding of that, then and only then can you start to plan and figure out what that overall migration is going to be and what you're going to need to do. Part of that is some of these considerations, preparing your destination. So you got your arms around your Documentum system, you've got your arms around what's in there and what you're going to want to take out of there. Well, you got to have a place to put it. So have you been using SharePoint Online already? Do you have an information architecture developed? Do you know how you're going to set up your site hierarchy, your site structure, your document libraries for all of the information you have? Do you know, maybe you've got departmental implementation in Documentum, or you've got each department or functional area has got their own space. Are all of those going into a separate site? Are they going into a common site with different document libraries? Those are all decisions that you've got to make. And then once you have that, you also have to be concerned about your content types and your metadata columns, and what are the values that you're going to need to have as part of your metadata model, so that you can support migration of the data that you do want to move into SharePoint Online. All really important considerations. And then lastly, under this point, security and permissions. Documentum has got the capability to have fairly complex security model all the way down to document level security. And the last thing you want to do is to start to replicate identically the security into SharePoint, because SharePoint's got different sets of best practices that it recommends on managing content in sites and in document libraries. So this is where you really want to take the opportunity to feed your existing security model into maybe some decisions around how you want to model security in SharePoint to support the requirements you have, but not to replicate identical one-for-one security. You want to take the opportunity to do it according to Microsoft's practices, recommendations, and that's a big piece of the puzzle, understanding how you're going to secure that information. Keep it simple. A lot of times people have a desire or a tendency to want to try to just get it done quickly, get it all done in one shot. That's the worst thing you can do. Our experience tells us that chopping it up logically not only can help you with the change management process and management of the process, individual pieces of the process throughout your entire migration, but it can help you in other ways. For example, You have better control over the handling of the data. You have better control or more granular control over the success of the migration. If something were to come up during the migration where you start to encounter situations that you didn't plan for, you have the ability to isolate that issue in that one small package instead of it impacting the whole entire migration. So that's a real important one that we always recommend. Timing and execution. These things don't happen overnight. Migrations don't happen overnight. They can take a while depending on how much data you have. So, you know, going along with the whole change management part of this is you've got to set realistic expectations. You can't have your users thinking that this is going to just happen. We have a tool. We bought a product and it's going to help us migrate. So, you know, hey, I hear that we can move a terabyte a week. Well, maybe the tool can manage to move data that quickly, but there's so much more than just the tool, as I mentioned earlier. You know, so you've got to really set realistic expectations around the execution. After you've planned and mapped it out, you have the ability to communicate that effectively. Planning for validation and user acceptance, you want to be able to ensure that everything that you had in the source that you intended to put in the target has made it through. We call that a full fidelity migration, being able to see that this document existed here with this information, this metadata, these dates, and I can see it in the target system in a library in SharePoint Online. And look, there's the dates. They match up. The metadata that I wanted to map over is there. Having a way to do that and show that, and also have your users be able to go through a process where they're selecting some sampling or whatever your required acceptance level is to be able to do that validation. And Gimmal Migrate has ways to facilitate both of these as part of the way we deliver migrations. Workflow and integration, we talked about that on the previous slide. It's part of your planning, you know, understanding that the data is the data, but what about the workflow, the business process that goes along with that? That's part of the migration. If you've got to stand up workflow processes to support that information and the use of the information in the new system, that's got to be part of your plan. You've got to be able to account for that and include that in your process. And I've mentioned this 2 or 3 times again. Lastly, it's always more about, you know, the planning and the people and the process, and less about the tool. The tool is going to work after you've done all this other work, and that's the way that we stress working with the team and understanding, just as you do in any implementation project, the people involved have to be your stakeholders in each of your functional areas, your departments, that can support making decisions and pulling the trigger and helping to guide this process for the migration to be successful. So I would be remiss if I didn't call out some specific Documentum considerations. And if you've been working with Documentum for a while, these are no real surprise to you, or shouldn't be a surprise. You know, there are differences that, as I mentioned, between the platforms. Security is going to be one of them. And we always encourage you to take a clean, fresh look at security when you're moving, not just from Documentum, but from any other system to SharePoint Online, whether it's OpenText Content Server or FileNet or Documentum. Take the opportunity to optimize for SharePoint Online and restructure where you need to follow Microsoft's best practices. The object model, Documentum has the capability to do some very elaborate and some very custom things, hierarchical object modeling with types and inheritance and conditional value assistance, a lot of stuff. So we always try to, again, just as with security, you take a fresh look at that, see if you can simplify it, see if you can rationalize it. While you're going through this motion, you'll thank yourself later. instead of just trying to re-implement the exact same model in SharePoint, take a look at what you're using as you're developing your information architecture. You may have some information going to one site and some other information going to another. You don't necessarily have to have the full object model implemented everywhere. So take advantage of your opportunity to reevaluate, simplify, and map effectively to SharePoint. Version control is different in SharePoint than it is in Documentum. So you're going to have to make some decisions as branching of versions that you can do in SharePoint that in Documentum that you can't do in SharePoint. So that's one thing you're going to have to pay attention and understand how you're going to handle. In our Gimmal migrate tools, we have a way to rationalize, for example, if you've got a version 1.2.3.4, SharePoint doesn't have any such animal. It's really major or minor. So we can help determine how to keep those versions stacked appropriately as far as data is concerned. But that's a concern there. And then information architecture. Embrace the change. Take the opportunity to develop an appropriate model using your Microsoft recommendations for sites and libraries. Don't just dump everything into one site, into a number of libraries. Really take advantage of the opportunity you have there for that. One of my last slides here on this subject is part of your planning. Develop checklists. We find that checklists are really, really powerful to help you make sure you don't lose track of things. So no matter where you are in your process, whether you're departmental investigation, or whether you're doing change management, or preparing SharePoint to handle the information, or whether you're doing QA, develop checklists at all points along the way, and that'll give you the enhanced ability to manage the process better. So we talked about information governance. This is all about trying to enable organizations to support their information governance objectives better, increasing the value. We talked about increasing the value while reducing the risk. Are you making decisions along the way while you're doing this migration that is addressing both of these bullet points? Increase the value. Are you adding value to the information or enriching it as you're moving it across? Are you reducing the risk that would be posed by migrating stale information or expired information? You're eliminating a redundant solution that's enhancing your information governance, and you're increasing access and findability by giving users more centralized access to the information. Of course, Gimmal, I've got to mention, we've got tools for Gimmal migration is our tool, which can help you make the most of your Microsoft 365 investment by helping you migrate from not only Documentum, but OpenText. And we help address a lot of these issues that I've brought up today and control the process. The tools can be installed. They are installed locally, and they are fast. But as I mentioned, the tools are only a part of it. So we also offer client success and consulting where appropriate to help organizations that need the assistance to ensure migration success. Some of the capabilities of our tools, just to name a few, as I mentioned, they're all client-side tools. They're all thick client tools installed inside your organization. Allow you to do metadata mapping. Once you've defined your target structure and your information architecture, you can map information, map metadata from the source to the target, inserting information additionally that doesn't exist in Documentum. For example, you've got enterprise level metadata, departmental metadata that you may want to add. We provide ability to inject additional information there. We provide you the ability to do some restructuring on the fly of cabinets and folders. If you notice that something's going to be too deep or too long as far as a path, you're enabled to fix it as part of the migration process. We provide support for custom object types, obviously, in the migration, as well as version history. And we provide a record of compliance and logs and validation information to give you that full comfort level of the chain of custody of the data from source all the way to the target. Okay. And again, we preserve all of the information from the source system. So all your dates, all of your data that is existing in Documentum can be moved over seamlessly and preserved. So with that, go to our final poll.
Yeah, and I can go ahead and pop in here. I'm going to be a little respectful of time. We're a little bit over, so I'll probably start there's one question, so we can get this done during the poll time. John talked mostly about migration methodology to ensure migration success. He briefly talked about Gimmal Migrate. We did not do a demonstration today. If you'd like to see a demonstration of the capabilities he just spoke to on the last couple of slides, you'll see a poll question pop up, and we will have a Gimmal representative contact you shortly after the demo, or I'm sorry, shortly after the presentation. But with that being said, we'll go ahead and ask the one Q&A question, unless any others sneak in here. How involved does your team need to be in these migrations? Can we perform an in-house migration with your tool?
Yes, so the answer is as you would expect. It depends, and I will quantify that. So it depends on how how mature your organization is and how knowledgeable you are with your Documentum system and your SharePoint Online system. So if you are comfortable with interacting with those and can use the tools are really not they're fairly intuitive, and they're not challenging to use to do the migration. As I mentioned, the main part and the main challenges are around the understanding and the knowledge of what you have in your Documentum system and how to map that over to SharePoint Online. A lot of organizations are really strong and can do that on their own. Some need help with the planning aspects. Maybe they've lost their Documentum expertise. Gimmal was founded almost 20 years ago as a Documentum expert consultancy. So we still have a great amount of expertise to assist in those types of migrations if that is a need. And we also have the ability to assist on the other side. So we can work with you to understand kind of your situation and can provide the level of assistance that you need if it's required.
Wonderful. So it looks like no more sneaking in. John, if you want to go to the next slide, if anyone has any more questions, our contact information should be popping up. There it is, right there on the screen. You can email either one of us and we'll get back to you. Or if our names are a little too hard to remember, if you go to the next slide, info@gimmal.com, we'll also get back to one of us. If you have any other follow-up questions, you can also visit our website at www.gimmal.com. For those who are interested in the recording of this webinar, we will be sending it out between 24 and 48 hours in the form of a thank you email. And we also hope to see you for our webinar next week, Retention versus Records Management, What's the Difference? Thank you for joining today's webinar, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.